everyone. Before we even get started, before I even introduce myself, I just want to quickly walk us through a few things. As you just saw, this is being recorded, so we want to ensure that you are showing up in ways in which you feel comfortable. So if you want to protect your anonymity, you can please feel free to remain off camera. You can change your participant name if you'd like, and you can also participate today only via the chat. If you do those three things, you probably won't show up on camera at all. So just really wanting to make note of that to ensure folks' privacy if they would like that. The second thing I'd like to talk about very briefly is that we do have the captions enabled. So if you click the CC button on your below menu bar, that will pull that up. Keep in mind, it's auto-generated by Zoom, so not always the best and most reliable, but I know personally I like to have them on. So that is an option for you. And then lastly, and then I promise I'll tell you who I am, we ask you to remain on mute, please, unless we're doing participation or questions. It just sort of helps our presenters sort of ground and stay focused. So again, ensure your privacy because this is being recorded. Captions are available, and please remain on mute. Okay, so with that, hello, everyone. My name is Arc Telos Saint Amor, but most folks call me Tay. My mandatory pronouns are they, them, their, and I'm the Executive Director of Youth Move National, which is one of NTAC's partner organizations. It is an absolute pleasure to welcome you to today's National Training and Technical Assistance Center session, How Systems of Care Can Wrap Around Youth and Families Impacted by Gang and Gun Violence. This is a new series, and it quite frankly, it's an important series. So we are so glad that you all came today. This is something that needs to be talked about, and it's something that needs to be lifted up. But it's also a very, very serious topic. So we just encourage y'all. It's going to be heavy today at times. So please self-care as we move on. Okay, before we get started, I have a few more housekeeping items to go over with you. So I'd also love to learn, though, while we're doing that, a little bit about y'all. So while I'm walking through some entry-level slides, doing some housekeeping, I'm going to throw a prompt in the chat. So if you want to share with everyone your name, your pronouns, your organization, your role, and where you are located, that would be great. Bonus points if you know what occupied tribal land that you are on, and I gave you a little link there to help you out. So while we're doing our housekeeping, please feel free to share with folks and network and get to know everyone. Okay, so let's get those slides up. Okay, I think we're good with that one. Go to the disclaimer next. Perfect. Okay, so as a part of our session, we must provide you with this disclaimer. This presentation was prepared by NTAC under a cooperative agreement from SAMHSA. While this event is supported by SAMHSA, the contents and those of the authors do not necessarily represent the official views of SAMHSA, HHS, and the United States government. Next slide, please. Security. While we hope, of course, that this will not be needed, if there are any security issues, Zoom bombers, anything like that that takes place, we really want to ensure everyone's safety, especially our panelists and our folks presenting today. So in the event that this does occur, the session will immediately end and you will be notified by email on how to rejoin a new session. Hoping that won't happen though. Okay. All right, so if you can perceive the screen, we've got a list of our partners. These are all partners of NTAC, so we're really excited to uplift their work. They have all come together to utilize their experience and their subject matter knowledge to help inform the field by creating products, resources, and sessions like the one you're about to see. And all of these are meant to enhance the behavioral and mental health fields. Okay, let's talk about our vision. All right, our vision and our services. As a center, our vision is that all children, youth, and families living with and impacted by mental health challenges will have access to the resources and opportunities that they need to thrive in a comprehensive and equitable system of care. We serve a wide cross-sector audience, including everyone from state leaders to providers to school workforce, infant and early childhood providers, community-based providers, care supervisors, family partners, youth partners, all of y'all, and much, much more. So we are so glad that you are with us today. Some of our services, this range from individual consulting, TA, to more in-depth sessions like the ones we are offering today. So peer learning exchanges and tools, all of these are designed to help you, and our name is to really create those outlets for communication, collaboration, and resource sharing amongst all of us. So please also make sure to check us out on the web. We have all of our resources there. We have a contact us link. We have all sort of the good stuff there. So I will throw that into the chat for y'all so you have it as well. Okay, we're almost there, I promise you. Okay, commonly asked questions. Before we get started, we wanted to address some commonly asked questions that come up during our sessions to let you know before we get started some answers to those. In the follow-up email for today's session, you'll receive a certificate of completion, a link to the recording of this session, and a copy of the slide deck presentation that is being showed. You should have also received some of these, including the slide deck, in a reminder email that either went out yesterday or earlier today, if you would like to pull that up to have access for it. Okay, and then the last one, and I'm gonna pull you over to Evelyn and we'll get started. I just wanna welcome y'all one more time. We've made it through all our housekeeping items, so we wanna welcome you formally to today's session, how systems of care can wrap around youth and families impacted by gang and gun violence. And I'd like to introduce your host. Evelyn Clark, CPC, is a Mexican Native American woman specializing in justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, also known as JEDI, youth leadership development, and peer support. She is a change consultant and JEDI trainer for Change Matrix and partners with NTAC. She has nearly 15 years of experience serving young people and their families within systems of care impacted by gang and gun violence. Evelyn has served on several initiatives on gang and violence prevention and intervention. She represented lived experience and mental health care to support youth and families. Evelyn is a justice-impacted professional and has dedicated her career to dismantling racism within systems of care to serve BIPOC youth and families better. So, without further ado, I will stop talking, I will stop rambling, and I will introduce you to the brilliant, the amazing, dare I even say my friend, Evelyn Clark.
Hi all, welcome. I think we're having some technical, I don't know if you can see me spotlighted or not. There we go, thank you. Again, welcome, and Tay, thank you so much for your welcome and for reading that. I know it's not about me, and I just appreciate, the love from everybody. And I just wanted to thank all of you for being here today. This topic is near and dear to my heart, and also to all of the panelists today, as we have been personally impacted by gang and gun violence, whether it's our own lived experience or the experience of serving young people and families. I also just want to quickly thank NTAC for allowing this topic to be uplifted. This is the first time that we've had this discussion, and it will definitely be talked about in the future. I want to give a special shout out to Tracy Levins, who is our co-director. She just has a heart and passion for young people who have been impacted by the juvenile justice system and by gang and gun violence. And so I had this idea and she approved. And so I just, again, want to thank her and her leadership. And thank you all again, as Tay mentioned, we know that this topic in particular can bring up some stuff for us, especially if we've been impacted personally, but also have been on the other side where there are young people who not only lose their lives to death because of this topic, but also they lose their lives to the prison systems. So as we go forward, we're going to be talking about how some young people are also victims, even though they may have been the perpetrator in cases, but that we want to support them as well and help prevent them from being impacted by this as well. All right, thank you. We can go to the next slide. I don't know. There we go. Thank you. All right, so you're going to hear more about our wonderful presenters today, but you are in for a treat, let me tell you. These individuals that you see here, Candace Wesley, Dr. Cam Williams, Yvonne Elmendorf, and Vince Bialua, are really the first responders in this work. They are doing the incredible hard work. They are going above and beyond. I have worked with 3 of them in the field, and there's nothing else I can say about them being selfless leaders. And when it comes to this work, we know traditionally organizations like theirs are not funded by system of care, and so we definitely want to highlight them and ensure that they are getting the funding to do this work. And sometimes, you know, when funding isn't there, they still find a way around it, whether it's their own personal. And so again, we just want to uplift our leaders in the field doing this work. Thank you. And I'm going to do a land acknowledgement. So thank you, Tay. If you know where you're calling in from today, that would be great to put it in the chat. I am calling in from Olympia, Washington, which is home of the Salish and Squaxin peoples. And I'm going to do a virtual land acknowledgement to get us started. All right, I see someone's having, can everyone hear me okay? I see someone is having, maybe just put it in the chat. I can't see anybody.
We can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I see someone was having issues. All right. So since our activities are shared digitally to the internet, let's also take a moment to consider the legacy of colonization embedded within the technology, structures, and ways of thinking we use every day. We are using equipment and high-speed internet not available in many Indigenous communities. Even the technologies that are central to much of the art we make leave significant carbon footprints, contributing to change in climate that disproportionately affect Indigenous peoples worldwide. I invite you to join us and acknowledge all of this, as well as our shared responsibility to make good of this time and for each of us to consider our roles in reconciliation, decolonization, and allyship. I also want to take a moment to share that we also need to acknowledge that this country would not exist if it wasn't for the free enslaved labor of Black people. We honor the legacy of the African and Black life, knowledge and skills stolen due to violence and white supremacy. While the movement for justice and liberation is building, and we are witnessing the power of the people, many are still being met with violence and even being killed. Please join me in a moment of silence in honor of Black and Indigenous ancestors who have passed and who have paved the way for us. Thank you so much. All right, so again, thank you for being here. I'm excited for today's agenda. You are going to meet our subject matter experts in just a little bit. I have some kind of grounding to do. We're going to go through our disclaimer, and we are going to honor our young people again who have lost their lives to the system and to unfortunately passing from this topic. We're going to feature the why, and I'll go into that when we get to that slide. We're going to have a panel with questions and answers. So I will start with a couple questions, and then we're going to open it up to all of you to ask directly. And then we're going to have a call to action, because at NTAC, we really believe that we need action. We don't want to just have another webinar just to have another webinar, but we really want you all to walk away and take something back, so that even if it's one young person, that they can be impacted in a different light. Thank you. All right, so what is a Heart Work series? So a Heart Work series really came from my heart and the heart of others at NTAC. Like I was saying, we definitely want this to not just be a typical webinar. So please, please, please be engaged in the chat. Be ready to ask questions. Be ready to talk about your call to action. This is really a guided conversation. We know that this work in general really is about heart. We know that the impact of systemic racism and mental wellness really impacts our young people we're serving. And each panelist will talk about the hard work they're doing. As I mentioned before, they are first responders in the field of systems of care that are traditionally not funded. And so our hope is that those of you who have the funding, or those of you who are doing this work without it, that we can come together to make this community stronger. And our disclaimer today is that we acknowledge the harm and importance of school shootings. This series will not dive into this critical topic. This series really is about to honor young people, again, who have lost their lives to gang and gun violence due to the stigma and biases from systems of care. It will also discuss how systems of care can take action to serve youth who are impacted by gang and gun violence, and to address the root causes of gun violence. All right, so this is where you get to hear from a young person. Just a little quick opening here. This young man, Dominic Smiley, he is 23 years old. When I met him, he was 13 years old, and actually 3 of the panelists and I served him on a gang reduction project in Washington State. And unfortunately, even at 13, he needed severe intervention. He will share a little bit of why, but he was impacted. And, the continuation of stories we hear from Black and Brown young people is, again, I didn't get access to services. People told me I would amount to nothing. Kind of that bias that we talked about that we need to address within systems of care. And this whole "do you see me" actually came from this young man. He was 15 years old when he committed a serious crime. He was sentenced as an adult. And the judge looked at him during sentencing and said, "You are a monster and you do not deserve to be out in society." Well, so this young man and I went back to the room and he looked at me with tears in his eyes and he said, "Miss Evelyn, do you see me? Do you see me for me and not the crime I committed?" And so that really stuck with me. And I've heard these stories from a lot of the young people that I worked with, most of them impacted by gang and gun violence over the years. And so again, our hope is that you see them for them, that you see that although they may be involved in things that may be scary for some of us who haven't actually experienced it, that they are youth too, they are hurting, and they are also victims of trauma and neglect. So I am going to, we are going to play this audio for you. Dominic is currently incarcerated at an adult prison. He's 23 years old. Before he went to adult prison, we worked together on a youth voice initiative at the youth prison he was at. And you're going to see a little bit more about him after this audio as well. Thank you. Yes, I am not hearing. I don't know. We might be having some tech issues. 1 second.
It's there.
Are you not? I'm saying a lot of people are not hearing it.
Yeah, we can't hear the audio.
Okay. Well, let me see.
Should we tap into the highlighted thing?
No. Give me 1 moment and I'll get the audio up.
Thank you.
All right. Hi, Dominic. How are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. And yourself?
I'm doing okay, too. Thank you for taking the time to talk with me. I just wanted to ask a couple questions before we get started. Do I have your permission to share this on the NTAC webinar?
Of course, yes.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, so, I just again want to thank you, and I just want to ask a couple questions so the participants can hear from you around this topic of supporting youth who are impacted by gang and gun violence. So I just wanted you to kind of share, around not necessarily about, the details of what happened, but more of kind of what led you there. I met you when you were 13, and at that point, there was just a lot of things that you went through. So just talk to us a little bit about, growing up and how, things kind of came your way and kind of what led up to your situation.
Yeah, so, obviously growing up in Tacoma at such a young age, it was the true definition of a striped life, Growing up, I grew up in a little town called Tillicum, and from the earliest age I could remember, I was always told I was going to be nothing. Whether it was teachers, police officers that knew my family, whoever. I was always depicted as a future gang member, a future nothing, a future incarcerated individual, a future DOC member. And at the end of the day, sooner or later, it became true because at the end of the day, we're all product of our environment. And it's just like, say, social media. It's like whatever is socially influenced and socially acceptable is going to end up becoming the trend. And at that day and age, gangbanging for me was the social trend, and it became susceptible.
Yeah. And, with you saying all of that, I think sometimes people don't understand what comes with that lifestyle is a lot of trauma, right? A lot of things that we don't necessarily dig in. And I know that from working with you, you talked a little bit about growing around, you know, the violence, but was there anybody there before we met to help you or your family go through some of that trauma?
So when I was younger, I mean, we attempted counseling for anger issues, PTSD, and many other things along the way. But I mean, sooner than later, a lot of things just ended up failing on us because at the end of the day, nobody really tried. Nobody reached out. There was always somebody behind that desk, no one being hands-on. Mm-hmm. No one trying to come in the field and understand what we're really living and what we're trying to preach to them. Mm-hmm. They're trying to diagnose us with something that they don't even know what it is and what it isn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've definitely heard that happening, and definitely have experienced that, you know, working with young people in my own journey as well. Yeah, I mean, is there anything you want to say about just, you know, a lot of people blame the gangs, and although we know that there's a lot of things that have come about that aren't so positive, if you will, are there just any aspects that you gained from that because, you know, systems were not necessarily supporting you?
I mean, of course, growing up in the gang made me the man I am today. Whether that sounds bad, good, or anything in between. I wouldn't be here on this phone call trying to enlighten other youth and other individuals on the right things to do if I wasn't the man I was in the past or in the present. Mm. So at the end of the day, people just got to understand that, yeah, people might sign up for the wrong things, but there's good things within the wrong things. Mm. You know what I'm saying? There's always two types of failures. One is a fail that never was attempted. Another was a fail that was attempted, but had a learning lesson in it to show the progress of success. Mm. You know what I'm saying? So people just don't understand, even though people saying before, there's loyalty behind it, there's brotherhood behind it, and at the end of the day, there's family behind it. Someone that passion to drive to be the better than. Mm.
Wow. Well, Dominic, I could, you know, I could just sit here and talk with you, you know, all day. And so I wanted to just kind of end this note with what would be your call to action for those who came to spend time with us today to really learn from youth and from those who are affected by this lifestyle? What would you say to the workforce as their call to actions to better support young people like yourself?
My call to action for the individuals that are trying to help people like me and many other people incarcerated is never to give up. Understand that at the end of the day, even though we're incarcerated, there's always going to be that release date. There's always going to be the chance of coming home and having that second chance, third chance, or fourth chance. At the end of the day, as long as there's a chance, there's a way. Yeah. So always give someone that second or third chance and never give up on them. Even though they say no, sometimes they're scared of saying it because at the end of the day, there's a lot of times people will tell them, if you ask for help, you're a coward, you're weak, you're not strong, you're not independent. But sometimes teamwork makes the dream work. Mm.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for that. And with that, I just want you to know that we see you and I see you, and, you know, we're here for you along your journey. And thank you for taking the time to be able to change things for other young people who may be in your situation.
Yeah, definitely. And anytime I get a chance to really shine the light on the struggles within and out there is always an honor, you know. Something that I learned within here is that if anybody wants change, you got to understand that advancements demand change. And there's no way to do that without your advancement of progression.
Mm. Well, thank you so much for your time. I'm going to end the recording.
Thank you.
Thank you all for the love in the chat. Definitely be sure to let him know. Thank you. Yes, we see him. All right. So we're going to watch a quick news clip. As you see, Dominic is in this picture. This is taken at Washington State Capitol. These young men were involved in bill legislation while they're incarcerated. And so you're going to hear from young people who have, unfortunately, were kind of funneled through that pipeline from early ages and ended up committing some crimes related to gang and gun violence. But you will hear from them and their amazing leadership that they are doing here in Washington and beyond. Thank you. I'm not sure if it's playing on your end, Joanne. We can't hear it or see it.
Hey guys, we are giving out a ton of these DeWalt samples today. Just fill out our quick 2-minute survey and
blazer, a t-shirt for underneath, belt, and some shoes.
When you wear the same thing every day,
a t-shirt, pants, and some sneakers.
It's fun to get dressed up for a rare field trip.
So like this?
Other way.
Other way.
These young men are all serving time at Green Hill School, the state's maximum security facility for those convicted under the age of 21.
I feel freedom in this. I could taste freedom in this.
These offenders help change that law so they and others can stay at juvenile facilities until 25.
About to get certified in welding, about to
If you can come back to it in a moment, Evelyn, I'll have it working.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you all for forgiving around technology. So I'm gonna, we'll come back to the video because it's definitely important. But so what is the importance of this? You heard from the young man who did not receive proper services from systems of care and at an early age. And so the urgency around this is that the CDC, Center for Disease Control, are declaring that gun violence is the #1 killer for Black and brown children. And as you can see, that Black children accounted for 46% of gun deaths in 2021. And even though there are only 14% of the US under 18 population. So here we see that Black children are 5 times as likely to die from gunfire as their white peers. And so we, again, are going to hear from our panelists around the urgency and the racism that does exist that actually causes these numbers to be on the rise. And I think we may have the video. I saw it pop up for a second. Yeah, that's a good question. So let's save that for the panelists. We'll definitely get into that. I know Dr. Cam Williams will talk a little bit about that during her presentation. Thank you for that question.
Hey guys, we are giving out a ton of these DeWalt samples today. Just fill out our quick
Blazer, t-shirt for underneath, belt, and some shoes.
When you wear the same thing every day,
T-shirts, pants, and some sneakers.
it's fun to get dressed up for a rare field trip.
So like this? Other way. Other way.
These young men are all serving time at Green Hill School, the state's maximum security facility for those convicted under the age of 21.
I feel freedom in this. I can taste freedom in this.
These offenders help change that law so they and others can stay at juvenile facilities until 25.
About to get certified in welding, about to obtain my high school diploma.
Edgar Calixto was the driver in a deadly drive-by gang shooting when he was 16. He'll be locked up until 28. He was not looking forward to going to adult prison at 21.
It's a lot more hectic, more fights, riots. It's more political, race-wise. A lot of gangs and stuff like that,
It'll give them the resources that they need for proper rehabilitation.
19-year-old Joe Huntley is about to get his high school diploma.
Frozen on our end. I think we can go ahead and skip this. We can share the link with you so you can watch that. And if you have some time, just Google Washington State youth and bill legislation, and there are more bills that they helped pass. Right, so we're having some technical things happening, but we're gonna go to our panelists now so we can get those slides back up. That would be great. All right, thank you all for being so patient. Okay, so this is gonna be the highlights. You're gonna hear again from our subject matter experts. I'm going to allow Dr. Cam Williams to introduce herself, and she's going to give her presentation, and I hope it does answer a little bit about the systemic racism. Just quickly, from my own experience with working in community behavioral health, I saw it firsthand when it came to the assessments being done on young people, especially young people of color who were impacted. A lot of them would get screened out of services, or if they did get services, they would exit services earlier because there are biases, as we know, and racism existing in mental health, and a lot of that has to do with how assessments are being done, how some of the workforce have said things like, I didn't go to school to work with these young people. And so the biases and the stigma. So Dr. Cam, will you take us away?
Yes, thank you so much, Evelyn, and thank you for being invited here. Thank you, INTAC, and all the people involved. So I'm Dr. Cam Williams. I am a researcher at Evident Change, which is a nonprofit that does research to help other organizations, whether government or community-based organizations, to make changes on how they are approaching their work with young people. I'm also the CEO and founder of Interventionology. I am originally from Compton, California. I grew up there, my family is still there. And I've had firsthand experience with gun violence, the whole nine. I currently reside in Laverton, Utah, which is in southern Utah, about 2 hours away from Vegas. And I'm also a licensed social worker. So I work also part-time here at a local residential treatment facility for young girls. And some of the research that I do at Evident Change, currently right now, I'm the co-PI of our Girls and Gangs study, where we're looking at the community and contextual factors surrounding gangs, gun violence, the cartels. And so it's really exciting work just to be able to be on that project. It takes a different perspective where we're actually lifting up the voices of the people in that community. Next slide, please. So I'm just gonna talk very briefly about the work that I did on my dissertation, which has propelled me into this space. Really talking about pulling out one of the main topics that came out of my work was the impact of system labeling for gangs of color. Next slide, please. So the work that I did spanned 70 years. I started at the 1940s all the way up into 2010. And the reason why was because the research that was out there, even the research done by other researchers of color, couldn't find consistency throughout the years about why gangs have formed or reformed throughout history. And so what my research showed that there was a literal pursuit of power, whether it be economic, political, or community power over those timeframes, and it shifted based off of the environment and kind of what was going on within Black and Brown communities during that time. Next slide, please. So out of my work, which took me a very long time to complete, some of the themes that popped up around why Black and Brown gangs had formed and reformed, and more specifically Black gangs, was that there was stigmatization and labeling for Black men within society. There was this context of fear and protection where the Black community were trying to protect from outside factors, and they also had a sense of fear that was created around them. There was also racialized social control, and really what that means is that, you know, their space, right, was, you know, stigmatized. They're just being in a space were attacked, and policies were literally created to control the Black population. And then, of course, my last theme was the pursuit of power. So Black gangs, you know, they came into power and they lost power based off of what they were pursuing at the time. And so the next few slides just kind of create a visual of what I did. I utilized the Pittsburgh Courier, which is a Black newspaper that was, during the height of the Pittsburgh Courier, the go-to for the Black community. Next slide, please. So here, just looking at a newspaper article, it is showcasing the pursuit of power, where it's talking about how youth organizations were being built and created. And it was specifically being created by kids that were considered to be in a gang. And so some of the conceptions about gangs and the gang community, the way that society kind of pushes them out into the community is that they didn't have like real purpose. They didn't have these positive aspects for it. And my work really challenges that thought, because youth were out in the community, regardless of whether they were a part of the gang or in a clique or hung out with people that were, you know, committing crimes or violence against other people. They were still working towards building their community. Next slide, please. This is an example of how I coded the political power pursuits. So individuals that are considered gangs were in the midst of solving the crime problem themselves, as well as the Black community. And so this particular article talks about, we've heard over history how, especially for the Black community, it has been wiped out, right? Erased. People don't want to talk about it. They want to rewrite the history. And so I found that newspapers were a good detection of kind of what was happening and what was going on. For this article, there were actually a city that gave over power to the youth in that community. And they were considered the bad boys in that community, but they actually governed it. So they were the mayors, the law enforcement, and people don't talk about it. And it was also, the idea was created by a sergeant who was also Black. And so this kind of just shows that like we can be given power in our Black community, that the people that we're calling gangs also make good leaders when they have something vested in that community. Next slide, please. And so this slide talks about how economics played a factor in the pursuit of power as far as like gangs, Black gangs specifically. And so over history, right, the name of what a gang is has changed. And so you see here, right, at one point in time, and this was, I believe, the early 40s, 50s, they were considered political bosses. So this specific article talks about how, a colored or Black or a person of color, right, was the most influential political boss. Running numbers at that time was a big thing, and how the syndicate really threatened to like take over the rackets and the numbering game from this colored political boss. And so you also see the conflict between other groups that may have experienced something similar to the Black community coming into society, now kind of taking the role of this overarching like white idea of like, we want to take you down, right? It's not working together. It's like you're at the top, and we need to go in and take that power away from you. I believe that's my last slide, but I'm not sure. Yes, it is. So just to kind of summarize the work that I do, it just really expands the idea of what gangs are, who Black gangs, what they kind of pursued over history, and why it is important to kind of think about the labeling that we're placing on these individuals, because they're our brothers, our cousins, some pastors, right, like have been in that space. And so looking at them more from a victim perspective, because it is society that has like integrated into their lives that cause them to make these decisions on obtaining power and manipulating that within their space, and they're very confined to what they can and can't do. And thank you.
Thank you, Cam. Right. Candace, Miss Candy, would you like to take us away?
Top of the afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Candace Wesley, and I am the founder and the director of operations for Tacoma Ceasefire. Dr. Williams, great. Thank you for sharing that information, and Evelyn and everyone else that has been instrumental in providing this space for us to enlighten each other and have a time of sharing. This is phenomenal. I appreciate it. kudos. Um, Tacoma Ceasefire was born through the lenses of frustration in regards to racial and social injustices, men of color being killed by the police, but also men of color or us killing us. Let me be clear. And so I've been in the community a long time, and I've been fortunate to work to parallel a lot of community work alongside of Evelyn and Vince and Yvonne and several of the other panelists that you'll be able to encounter during this conference. It's so much to unpack, right? I wouldn't even know where to begin, but ultimately I approach this through the lenses of accountability all the way across the board for our youth and young adult population, and also adults and youth and young adults that have struggled with mental illness throughout the years, and those that struggle with mental illness as an aftermath of incarceration and navigating through these forms of injustices that I mentioned early on. I hail from Tacoma, Washington. I'm from the Hilltop, and I have a 33-year-old son by a rolling 60s Crip from Los Angeles. I've been around the world. I've seen a lot of things. Ultimately, and I'm a boy mom, and I'm a boy grandma, right? So I've seen where 80% of my family has journeyed through the school to prison pipeline. I sit at a lot of tables as a consultant. I'm also the director of operations for JCW and Associates. We're consultants to the city of Tacoma, the city of Lakewood, and we have some partners in Thurston and King County as well. Evelyn, am I free to just go?
Yeah, yes, of course.
So I feel that one of the rubs for me is the failed judicial system and the way that they incarcerate the disability or the mental health condition by way of incarcerating the individual. Ultimately, they're released back into society, and the expectation is that they are supposed to reenter society and function at this high capacity of rehabilitation when there's been no services provided. And there's an imbalance in regards to services being provided while incarcerated and services being provided once they are free. And another thing that I like to table is the selection of data that's collected in regards to offenses and crimes that are being committed. And the reason I strongly feel that they're selective in regards to data that's collected is because it's always the Black and brown offenses that they are quick to input that data and then put a Band-Aid on other ethnicities, or they will address this offense was created or this crime was created because, and they will give that person all of the resources that are needed and don't even commit the crime because it's not considered an offense. They will say it happened because of this, and so this is how we're going to help you, opposed to putting their name, address, their photo on media platforms. And then we can table the media exploitation as well, right? And what I'm finding with that is, or is it just me, or have you all found that when the media highlights you, they find the most unwholesome picture that they can to assist with painting the narrative? Because the things that we see, we cannot unsee them, right? The things that we hear, we can forget that we heard that conversation, but it's something about our mind and the endorphins in our brains. We can never unsee the things that we see. And so my approach to whether when I'm at the table, whether I get to speak or not, you can never unsee the fact that you saw me, right? And so I stand on the side of truth, regardless of who it is. And then I'm hearing a lot now of cultural relevancy in regards to the approach to our work. So many times we fly in specialists from other cities that can come in and make beautiful yet failed attempts at giving us the antidote or the prescription for what violence reduction should look like in our city, and how we should approach grief and healing. I think that all of those things, and I'm sure a few of you will agree, those things are case by case scenario. We have to work. I'm from Tacoma, so it's best for us to put together a forum and a prescription for what would best fit our city, right? And so another thing that I feel that makes it complex in regards to organizations and agencies to come together and do the work is funding. And when I say funding, I could use several different strokes of the brush to table that, but I'd like to talk about the way they say that we're supposed to execute the funding. So if Dr. Williams is serving a youth and we both have the same type of funding, we're supposed to serve them in different capacities, right? And I believe if the funding is available, if she's serving him in one capacity and I'm serving him in the same capacity, we should be able to use that funding, because one level of service is not always enough. Again, I'm going back to that case by case scenario. So even though she may serve him on a level from 1 to 5, we have to be intentional as it relates to, I cannot serve you past this point, but I can continue to serve you from 1 to 5. So now I'm going to thrust you over to Yvonne, and Yvonne's going to serve you from 5 to 8, right? And then I'll thrust you over to Jonathan Staggers, and Jonathan can service you from 8 to 10. We should be able to do all of that out of one pot, especially if it's effective and if it's going to be the catalyst to launch somebody forward towards their wellness or towards their new look on life. So funding, or once you get the funding, this is the first year Tacoma Ceasefire has ever received funding. We've been fortunate just to do it out of our own pockets, because I refuse to do the dance and I refuse to play the political games behind the scenes. All the while, our children are still reoffending. Our children are still being incarcerated. Our children are still dying, and our children are still underserved, but overly exploited. So you can share his story and give him $100 stipend, but then your organization gets $2 million for his story being shared. He gets the $100 stipend, and then he's made to go on and journey without the services that you used his story to get funding for, right? And so I always like to table, how can we come together in regards to funding? But until that is unpacked, as far as Tacoma Ceasefire is concerned, and on behalf of JCW and Associates, we cannot afford to stop. And so I would love to be at more forums like this, opposed to more eulogies, opposed to more funerals. I just finished a contract where we sent some young ladies to a hair braiding camp. And I was told that the hair braiding class was not something that they felt could enhance her quality of life, but I could pay for Bobby to take driver's ed. So which one? Which it's an oxymoron. You want her to be a licensed braider No, but you want him to be a licensed driver. That's okay. So where do we draw the line? So with or without your money, I'm going to pay for this young lady to take this braiding class. And it was founded to be as successful. So if you give me money and I agree to this contract, you don't get to do an amendment midstream because you feel or you want to put a level of importance on a driver's license or a hair braiding license. A class is a class and a license is a license. And so those are the type of doors that I push open and say, I believe in accountability. If you incarcerate her for committing a crime, I'm going to hold you accountable for trying to differentiate what's the importance of each class. And so that's my take. And I think it's important that we stay connected and that we tap into each other and move away from the language of, I want to have the people at the table that are really doing the work. What does that mean, really doing the work? Who made that up? And why are we using that so much? Who's really doing the work? If your work is to make sure we have water at the event, if your work is to have the microphone, if your work is to make the flyer, if your work is to make sure that Jenny gets that gift card, the work is the work. If your work is a position of prayer, I think we are all really doing the work. I travel the world preaching. And the one thing I will never do is let anybody put a muzzle on my mouth concerning the wellness and the betterment of other people. Now, granted, Tacoma Ceasefire is an organization made up of 51 men, right? And a lot of people will say, how can you guys be led by a woman? I don't lead the organization. What I do is make sure that the men lead. And because I'm a preacher, you know how the Bible says that sheep beget sheep. My belief is that streets beget streets as well. So if I'm a hairstylist, I'm not going to try to come talk to this young lady about nursing and what I feel strongly about in the nursing field. It's important that we all stay in our lanes and speak to what we're called to speak to, and also be humble enough to say that's not my sweet spot. So let me connect you to Eartha James, because that's Eartha James' strong suit. And also, if there's a man present, as women, it's okay to yield to that man, because that man, only that man can speak to that man through the lenses of being a man. I can speak to that man through the lenses of being a mother, raising a young man. But if there is a man willing to speak to that young man, sis, we got to fall back and let the men lead the men. But ultimately, the flip side of that same coin is, as women, we have to yield to each other and honor each other. We may all have PhDs at the table, but if Yvonne is leading this, my responsibility is to have my head on the swivel. And when she moves, I move like that. If she doesn't tell me to move, I just wait till she wants me to hand her the napkin. So when it comes to our children and community and violence and racial and social injustices, it starts at the top. If we're divided on the top tier, how do we expect unity in regards to being a voice for our city and for our Black and brown babies? If we're divided on top, it's not going to look like a united front. When we leave our offices, when we leave our houses, when we close these laptops, we're not going to look united. We can front and act like we are, but it's so important that we yield to each other's strong suits, that we yield to each other's field of expertise, that we yield to each other's license to operate in regards to certain topics, certain neighborhoods and things of that nature. But then back to accountability. You can be the Pope, you can be the city manager, you can be the congresswoman. Right is right. I don't care about your tax bracket. I don't care if I never get invited again. You knew what you were getting when you invited me to the panel. It's about accountability for the mental health system, for the judicial system, for the political arena, and community-wise, faith-based organizations. Truth has to be truth in order for our communities to heal. And that's a message from here to Auckland, New Zealand, to Melbourne, Australia, to Africa. We have to hold people accountable. We can't keep saying, and I commend that young man that shared his story when the judge says, "You're a monster." That's discrimination. That's discrimination because it's his responsibility to address the crime and give the sentence. Nobody asked you for the label. He's already been labeled before he even gets to your courtroom. So things like that, we leave the courtroom and we say things like, "That was so unkind for him to say. That was so unkind." I'm not going to say it behind closed doors before I say it right there. Excuse me, Your Honor, who are you talking to? Are you talking about one of your kids? Because there's no way you can be talking about this young man. I can't tell you what to do with your child, but what you're not going to do is say that to that young man. And I'll speak life right then and there and cancel everything that they say. And oftentimes we get intimidated by a title. We get intimidated by positions. We get intimidated by degrees. But I'm 55 years old. And at this stage of the game, everybody on this panel, you're here because of your lived experience, because your desire to serve. So what? That gives us a PhD in life, bottom line. And so as not to take up too much of your time, that is why I'm here. My main objective is to bring truth, to bring enlightenment, and ultimately to support. And so I appreciate your time.
Miss Candy. Yes, look at the stat. You are making people cry, the heart. It's always a sermon with you. And I honor you and value you so much. I've seen you respond to, unfortunately, young people on the ground. I've seen you, again, just be selfless and go, I don't even know if it's called above and beyond, but just beyond and beyond and beyond. So thank you so much for being here.
God bless you all.
All right, Miss Yvonne, you ready?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Miss Candy. That's a hard presenter to follow. So I just want to start with saying I'm so grateful to be here today to speak to so many people across the nation. Thank you, Evelyn, for giving us this opportunity and just to kind of share where we come from and why we do what we do and how it all kind of connects together. So my name is Yvonne Elmendorf. I am a mother of 4 children. I'm a wife. I've got, 24 chickens, a dog, a big bunny that roams the yard and doesn't run away. I have my degree. I am the director of substance use disorder and violence prevention at Consejo Counseling, and we serve Western Washington, all the way up to the border. But I also am somebody who came from, all the things that we've been talking about today. And that's why I'm here today. I too was born and raised in Los Angeles from the West Side. I experienced growing up in a family where, generational gang violence, and all the things that come with that, the drugs and that life was a norm. It's normal, it's the community you live in, that you come from. When you're a kid, you don't see the difference if that's what you know. So, as a child, my mom thought moving us out of Los Angeles up north, everything would be great, but there's gangs and violence everywhere. That's why there are so many people on the call today, because, we just found it here in Washington State. So going through that, being a youth who was involved in gangs, violence, selling drugs, feeling like, I think I was 13 when I got my first revolver, because I felt like I needed it and I wasn't safe if I didn't have it. And being incarcerated for a year when I was a teenager, and watching my little brother, he started getting locked up when he was 10. And he was in juvenile detention centers. He went to probably every juvenile detention center that you could think of in Washington State: Green Hill, Maple Lane, Naselle. And now he's in his late 30s. And, the same behavior every time we saw him. He later on moved to maximum security prison. So he was in Walla Walla and a couple other prisons for most of his life, and then moved on to federal prison. And just watching someone that you love be continuously sent back to incarceration from being a 10-year-old baby. Every time he went, he was training to be harder, and he learned new things while he was there. Even in juvenile rehabilitation facilities, he learned how to be a stronger gang member. He moved up in ranks within the Mexican, gang communities. Within the prison center system, it's a lot harder. So every time now, here we are today, I'm a substance use disorder professional in Washington State, and I supervise and manage that program, and I manage and supervise gang violence prevention, because what I found is that it all comes full circle. I turned into, I abused drugs when I was a teenager because I was trying to cope with the trauma and all the things that were going on around me. That is why I chose to become a substance use disorder counselor later. I would not be here today if I didn't get incarcerated and they didn't force me to get my GED, because I didn't go to high school. So me being able to go to to Echo Glen and get my GED there, that really put me in a place where I could go back, and somebody that came from the same lifestyle, who was a manager 17 years ago, said, "Hey, you don't want to be a secretary or someone who answers the phone. What do you want to do?" And I said, "I want to help kids. I want to do that. I want to get back to the community that I came from." So that person saved my life, because like everybody else here today said, I was only being told throughout a childhood and while I was incarcerated that I would never, you'll work in fast food, maybe you'll be a waitress, you'll be able to make tips, but you're never going to be nothing else. You didn't go to high school, honey. You don't know what it's like to be a professional. So being able to be first generation college graduate in my family really just makes me feel good. I'm able to set the tone for all the kids and young adults that I work with in the community, for my own children, and being able to show that no matter where you come from, whether you've been in jail, you've been in gangs, whatever it is, you were a drug dealer, we're all worth the same amount as everyone else, and we can all surpass those who didn't experience any of that and have the best upbringings. We can all do it. So now today, here we are, and my biggest thing is focusing on youth and young adults. Right now, I work in the Tacoma community. I started my journey at Consejo Counseling and being able to work with kids in gangs and experiencing mental health and addiction issues in South Park, South Seattle. So that was great. I have my most experience in education and personal experience in Hispanic gangs, but I have worked with kids and young adults from all different cultures, all different types of gangs. I love to learn about how, they operate, but my biggest goal is to find out the why. I'm not concerned about what gang you're from, you know, how long you've been, where do you guys do? I want to know why. You know, is it because you need to make that money because it's easier to make money when you're on the streets and no one wants to hire you, but this gang will help you make the money? You know, getting food in their mouths, getting them a safe place to live, housing, connecting them to substance use disorder programs and mental health therapy for the traumas that they're experiencing. But the biggest thing are those emergent needs. You know, how can we get somebody to focus on living a safer life? They have a lot of emergent needs. You know, they need to be able to make money in a safe, legal way, which is often very hard for them to do because of records, because of titles and stereotypes in their community. They need to be able to have a safe place to live and be able to feel like they don't have to continue to acknowledge that they're in a group that's going to have their back and take care of them. And they don't have to, when you feel like you don't have to carry a gun anymore, that's a really great feeling as a person, because you no longer feel like you're being exposed to that. You know, you're no longer exposing yourself. Being able to get out of that situation help somebody get out of that situation is really comforting, knowing that you're able to do that. So that's what I've spent the last 17 years doing, is just helping connect those, finding out, you know, what are those main needs, connecting, doing that intensive case management, connecting them to the services or the resources that they need, to where they can get to the point where they don't feel like they need to be involved in gangs and, you know, participate in the activities that eventually do lead to violence, them being killed or being incarcerated for a very long time. I think my biggest point I want to get across today is incarcerating babies, incarcerating children and teens, and thinking that that's going to help the situation, because it doesn't. Most of the time, it makes them harder. It makes them tougher, and they get a lot more PTSD and trauma while they're locked up than when they are home in the community receiving those same services, rehabilitation services in the community. And another thing is probably just, you know, highlighting, like Miss Candy said, funders. You know, a lot of us do work in or manage violence prevention and reduction programs, or we focus on gang violence and other violence in the communities. And there's so much red tape around that funding. You know, we get funding here at my facility, and the funders basically tell us, you can do this, but you can't do that. Well, this is the only thing this person needs, but you can't do that for them. So it's just, there's so much red tape around funding. So a big thing I like to do is advocate, especially, you know, telling funders that they have to do more. They can put $1 million somewhere, but if it's not, the $1 million isn't helping anyone that needs that help, then what's the purpose of putting that $1 million out there? Yeah, and just, you know, a big, huge thing is housing, getting people safe housing. People are being put out of their communities that their families are from because of gentrification. And that's a huge thing. People have families, and teens are having to move into communities that they're not safe in. And people don't understand that. And that also, you know, moves violence in our communities. And that's something that we've seen happening a lot here in the Tacoma area and Pierce County and the Seattle, King County areas too, where it's just, it's getting really bad. People can't afford to live, and people can't afford to be safe. That's just plain and simple. Being safe right now is, how would I say it? It is a privilege, and it has been for many, many years, and it shouldn't be that way. We should all be able, this is not a third world country. This is the United States. Supposedly we all have opportunity, and we should all have the opportunity to be safe and send our babies to school and be able to know that they're going to come home and not be shot, or, you know, not be killed in a drive-by shooting while they're at the park. That's just something that we should all have the opportunity to feel. And unfortunately, people of color often don't have that privilege here. You know, we're not able to live in those safe communities. And that's a huge deal right now. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll talk more later if people have questions.
Thank you, Yvonne. Thank you. Yvonne really is that go-to person. When I was in direct services working with her, I would call her and be like, this young person needs services, like, and she literally, probably within the next hour, even less, she would have them enrolled. And so again, these are the individuals that are out there, they're doing the work, they're getting around that red tape. And so, you know, you touched on this, and I want to say this before we get to Vince, is that you said we all, that we don't, as people of color, sometimes have opportunity to live safely. And that really ties into the systemic racism that exists within communities, right? That Jennifer Kate, that's all created to push Black and brown people to, right? There's no such thing as Black on Black crime. That's all part of the white supremacy racism that's made to do what it's doing. So thank you. All right, Vince, we are so excited to hear from Vince.
Yes, aloha everyone. My name is Vince Vialua, and thank you so much for sharing space with me this morning. I'm the only male panelist on here. I don't have any cool slides like Dr. Cam, or I don't know if I have anything prophetic to say like Pastor Candace Wesley, or if I have all the juice like my sister Yvonne, but it feels good to be on this call and to share space and to learn about best practice. It's good to see all you wonderful folks. Mahalo to everyone from the beautiful island of Tacoma, Washington. I'm a father of 6 beautiful children. I'm a husband to a beautiful woman. Yeah, 6 kids, so pray for me, y'all. I started an organization, Tough Love Project 253, an organization that works to serve young people who have come in contact with the juvenile justice system. I've been fortunate to lock arms with these lovely ladies along with Evelyn. Many, many moons ago, we implemented the comprehensive gang model here in the city of Tacoma. I was fortunate to kind of lead those efforts here. And a lot of great things derive from those efforts. As some of those, and we'll talk a little bit about that. A lot of my work has been in serving young people who are in detention. So you saw some of the young men who we referenced, Green Hill. It's a maximum security. It's about an hour away from us here in Tacoma. And my focus has been really to look at culture as a form of intervention. So teaching young people, I come from a strong Polynesian background. And so I work heavily at Green Hill, providing cultural groups for Asian Pacific Islander inmates, and then helping them to transition in and out of incarceration by getting them the resources that they need. But it's important. I also share a similar pathway. I see a lot of Cali, LA folks. I was born in San Jose, California, and then raised in Linwood, Los Angeles, California. So a lot of roots there, but I think about my own story and being a young Pacific Islander and being impacted by the disease of violence. Shout out to Dr. Marshall, Street Soldiers. Go and read that book, doing a lot of great work out of the Bay Area. But as a young man, I was impacted by the disease of violence. I saw people who looked like me, and they had these tattoos, they wore colors. And I felt that as a young person, you know, I just resonated with the way they looked and the way that they moved, the way that they engaged with one another. And so I was conflicted as a young man. I come from, you know, this strong Polynesian roots. I also see this other kind of lifestyle that is beginning to infatuate me around gangs. And I was lost in that. And what I discovered, I was fortunate to actually go back home to American Samoa and grow up there and see what life was like. And that really, you know, for me, it really helped to open my eyes to really discover who I really was by understanding who I was from a more cultural lens. and that I actually wasn't from, right? I was born in California, but my canoe actually goes a lot further away than San Jose, California. And I think for me, it has been my mission to help teach young people the importance of that, especially for Pacific Islanders who are involved in stuff like gangs. And I remember being on a call, juvenile justice reform call, or a meeting, and there was all this conversation. They were looking at data, There was all this data around different demographics, different races. And I asked the gal who was leading the conversation, can you show me some data on Pacific Islanders, primarily Samoan children? And she paused for a minute and she said, I don't have any data. And I said, what do you mean you don't have any data? She said, I'm sorry, I don't have any data. It's primarily that calls out, the demographics for the state of Washington as it relates to Pacific Islanders or Samoans. That for me was a wake-up call. That right there said to me, like, we are literally lost in this system that is broken, right? And talk about call to action. Well, then that was my call to action. That's my call to action, because we are lost in a system that wasn't created by us. You have no data. However, we have a representation of young Pacific Islander, Asian Pacific Islanders who are in your system, and they are literally lost because you have zero data. And so it pushed me to go into places like Green Hill to teach and educate our people, teach them the more cultural. We come from a very oral culture. Everything is through song and dance. If you know anything about Polynesians, we love to sing, we love to dance, and we love to eat, right? That is the breeding ground for how we build community, is we sit at a dinner table and we build relationships there. We come from a strong relational community. And so it's important for me to advocate for not only in detention, but outside of that. And so my current role right now is I'm director for programs for communities and schools here in Tacoma. And so we have a huge, large Pacific Islander community here in the Northwest, here in Tacoma. And so we've set up organizations and programs right here in the school district that help to teach our young people the importance of where they come from, who they are, right? And then we streamline that right into detention as well. And so we're able to teach these young people their true identity of where they come from. And just to go a little deeper, we have young people who come from, even who are, Black students who want to be a part of, Pacific Islander Club, and I asked the question, why are you a part of our club, and why don't you, be assured whatever it is. And so some of them say, I want to learn, more of my roots and where I come from. And so there's something that resonates with them culturally. And that's part of the challenge and the call to action for us too, as just an organization, as a community too, is to be intentional about the ways that we're providing program, and that we're looking, a lot deeper into the lens so that we can, be mindful of young people and where they're at, and truly meeting them where they're at. So, it's been my mission, and I've been fortunate to do this work for over 20 years in this great city. I believe collaboration is key, and I'm just grateful to, be here and just to share space and my story. And I'm just thankful to Evelyn for allowing me to be on this panel. And I hope that whatever I share adds value to this conversation. And I'm interested in always learning and talking about, sharing best practices and ways that we can move collectively forward that benefit us all. Because honestly, I don't have all the answers. I'm not on here saying, I know Evelyn has said subject expert matter. I'm no expert, but what I do is that, right, when she said heart work, I have the heart, right? And that is important. If you have the heart, and I will just close by saying this. I was watching a TED Talk. I forget the name of the gentleman. I want to say he's from Texas, where he's talking about normalizing toxic behavior within these young people. And there was a question that was mentioned earlier on what you can do, what your role is. And I thought about this is, you see young people nowadays. I remember growing up in the community, right? As bad as I was, right? I have a lived experience. As bad as I was growing up, I always had respect for adults. I will say that, right? And even some of the hardest gangbangers that I knew growing up, we just understood that concept. For the most part, there was this common respect that we had when it came to adults. When I remember being 15 or 16, I would not smoke a cigarette in front of an adult. I knew that when I saw an adult, I would put it out, right? There was something triggered in me to understand that. Nowadays, you don't have that. I see young people who are 13, 14 years old, they're vaping, smoking. And I'm like, yo, man, I'm a grown man. I'm an adult. Like, what is that, right? And it's in those moments when we talk about what can you do, you can, that's, you have a responsibility right there to say something, right? For me, I'll always say something, right? So that kid or that young person can always remember and say, man, anytime I, stop by a store and I see young people just outside on the corner smoking, I'll say, yo, how old are y'all? Should y'all be smoking? Should y'all be doing that? Yeah, don't get mad at me or whatever it is. But I know the next time they see that big, ugly brown dude pull up to the store, they'll stop because I took the time to say something, right? And I think that is, we all have a responsibility to doing that. And it's just those small things. And that requires all of us working together. So thank you. I appreciate y'all. Send it back to E.
Thank you so much. One of the things, I love many things about events, but is like you were saying, the feeding. Like Vince does a lot of community mobilization where he's out there setting up events. And again, like money, like that's not an issue, right? If you can't get the funding, he's gonna come through with it. And so I've seen him, feed these young people and just build community. And I remember this one event in particular where there was different youth who were in different gangs, but the way that, he brought them together from different cultures, there was healing. So thank you all for all that you do. You bring healing to not only young people, but the community. Yes, all the love in the chat. Thank you all so much. All right, so I know we have a little bit less of a half an hour or so, but we really want you all to be able to ask questions and dialogue. So if I could have the panelists up to be spotlighted, that would be great. And I'll ask a couple questions and then we will have you ask away. I think we are waiting for Miss Candy. There we go. Bring her up here.
I keep clicking this thing.
I think we can
see me.
Yeah, we can see you. There we go. No worries. Awesome. Again, thank you so much. Yes, you're right. This is heart work. And so we just thank you all for being here. I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about to what Dominic had shared in the beginning. He had mentioned that when he was, right, we hear these stories a lot, unfortunately. He would hear from teachers in elementary school that he was going to be a gang member, that he, would amount to nothing. And so I think about systems of care, and I think sometimes early childhood is not at the table. I think when we think about the interventions that his mom and dad could have had, right, to kind of help them with supporting and maybe have a different way of life. So I want to kind of speak to, and I know you all have that experience too, and we may not call it, the official early childhood, but how can systems of care, so that includes early childhood, mental health, SUD, education, grassroots, how can these systems truly come together to collaborate? I know Miss Candy talked about this. We've seen it happen, but for some reason, systems of care are still failing these young people. And so we would, anyone can start us off, but I would love to hear about collaboration and how systems of care can come together.
I'm gonna go first if the ladies don't mind, because I know they got a bunch to say.
Go for it.
And I won't be long, but I'll be strong. One of the great things for us in the city of Tacoma, and I say this too because Evelyn, Yvonne, and Candy, we're all part of this group. We implemented the comprehensive gang model, evidence-based model, right? We know about it, right? We also were intentional about looking at that model and and implementing it in a way that it met our demographics based on the data that we collected here in the city of Tacoma. And we kind of challenged the model in itself. But I will say that one of the greatest things, and I haven't seen it happen in this city in some time, was the intervention team, right? The intervention team was made up of youth serving agencies. It brought everybody to the table, which was so dope. You had outreach, we had the police, we had somebody, from DOC, we had mental health, we had all these great organizations at the table working together, right? And so there was some funding at the table. And so, but I would say that it's that, right? Somebody said on the chat, like, I know we're preaching to the choir, but what are some tangible ways? Those are the tangible ways. Those were the things that this team, I want to say of about maybe 30 to 40 people, we were collectively staffing and case managing young people together. And we were utilizing everybody's gifts. Everybody brought something to the table, right? And it was so dope because I didn't have to write and I'm speaking wearing my street outreach case manager hat. Like, you got to do 30 different things. What was so dope about sitting at that table is that I didn't have to, is that we were collectively working together, right? And so I think about, that's one thing that I want to say for whatever city, and I know that that's hard because of funding or whatever politics may be, but if you can get to a place where within your city, within your community, where all these agencies are at one table and you're being intentional about the work that you're doing and that you're leaning, right? That's community. We talk about teaching young people the importance of the community and work together. Well, guess what? It has to start with us, right? We have to put our bias aside, right? We have to collectively come to the table. And so if you can get to a place where that's happening, I think that that's a starting place, right? That for us, we didn't have all the answers, but it was so great to know that we had all these organizations together, working together in a tangible way. And we were staffing young people, and I think we met every week, once a week, which is a heavy lift, but right, that's what it takes. We talk about ending gun violence, then we got to meet every week, right? So that's why I want to add, and I don't know if it's happening, what that looks like, but if you can get to a place that, that looks like that, then I believe that it'll add value to the work that we're doing. Thank you.
Vince, that is so important. And if you look at the data at that time and parallel it to the data now and look at what violence reduction looks like, it's in comparison. When you approach it that way, that makes the work elite, because we're all coming together. We're talking about in what capacity this individual or this family is being served in. And then that way, when we leave from that place, we know how to fit in our gifts and our strong suit. And ultimately, I would like to address, like, when they got on the bandwagon of the school to prison pipeline, leaning in more and being intentional at the school level. And I don't mean after school programming, because if it's okay, it's almost like our kids are past that after school programming thing. They're over that, right? But just for some of my story, you get labeled. I had a speech problem and I stuttered very, very bad. They had me in the portables from elementary all the way up to, I think, the 8th grade. Because of my speech, I was in the class in the portable with the kids that had bibs and helmets and diapers. My recess was different. My lunch was different, which I fought a lot because I was teased, because I was classified because of my disability, which was my speech. And we had a teacher that came in one day and was looking for someone to be a teacher's assistant. And they let me be his assistant. And he was like, "Young lady," after about a month, "why are you in the portables?" I didn't know. I said, "I don't know. I've always been in the portables." There was a big meeting like the next week. Academically, there's no problem with her. I was labeled, I was teased, and I was bullied, and I was in those portables, not because of my ability to achieve academically, but it was because of my speech. He got me out of the portable, and I ended up soaring, being the president of my class, to just start the beginning of many other accolades and achievements from academic years. So also looking at some of the diagnosis and the way that they treat the diagnosis for school-age children, high school, middle school, factoring in on that too. Because if they're not able to function at full capacity in school, what do you think? Well, we already know what they do when they get out of school. It just carries on. It carries over from the school into the community. But I agree with Vince, bringing back those days of all organizations sitting at the table together.
For me, it's a combination, right? I think it's great, right? When we're in community with each other and we're lifting up the voices of everybody that's impacted, but we also have to think about the white supremacy that's built into the system, right? And so even from a research perspective, I love that Vince said, yeah, we took this model, right, that was evidence-based, but we utilized it in a way that was beneficial for our population. And I think that is the critical aspect of it, because when you, and this is why I became a researcher, when you dig into it, you know, these evidence-based practices don't surround people of color, right? A lot of them try to, and those are the ones that actually don't get identified as being evidence-based. There's very few that have started on the ground, right, all the way up that, you know, had those individuals in mind. So I think it's a component of challenging the system in the way we have to challenge the system, which sometimes is very difficult because the system pushed back, is doing things like taking an evidence-based practice and making it what you need it to be for the community that you serve. And so I think in partnership with bringing people together and working alongside each other, right? And helping, you know, the organization, the boots on the ground, those individuals to come together and you collectively use your data to be able to push the system back. But also we have to start at the top with challenging terminology, right? Why do we take this criminogenic approach to individuals that are clearly victims, right? Whether it be they are a victim of their community, right? Because like we've taken resources out of that community and they don't have a safe space to like redirect some of those behaviors and thoughts. They don't have people challenging them. They don't see people like them. And so like one of the issues that like rose up while I was doing research in Louisiana is like, we were talking about the school to prison pipeline. Well, all of the teachers are white in a predominantly Black community, right? And so like, what message does that send? And while it's hard to maintain and gather those people, we need to put our funding into helping Black and brown people, you know, get those certifications so that they could go into the schools and the students can see people that look like them.
I do see one of the questions in here where it talks about what does a outside of after school model look like. And I'll just share a little bit about a program that we've been doing recently, and it specifically focuses on community gun violence within teens and young adults. And we actually bring a focus group to the school. It's a middle school. We did it at 2 middle schools in the Tacoma area. And one of my girls goes there during lunch hour. She brings snacks, chips, you know, all kinds of goodies. And she has a group and she has a ton of kids. And these are mostly kids of color that they come because they've either had a brother, sister, cousin, best friend experience them being shot or exposed, or they see it in their community. The neighbor's house was shot up, or, you know, all of those different things that they see in their community or within their families. but they come and they work on projects and they learn about how gun violence affects families. They learn about statistics. We teach them things that to go and be leaders and teach their peers those same things, to go back to class, to go home and tell their parents and their siblings about them, how to be safe, how to avoid, you know, putting yourself in situations where you're going to get exposed to gun violence, like, you know, hanging out in with gangs and in different parts of the community. But those are things, and we call it violence prevention. And that's what we do during school, because like Ms. Candace said, they're not staying after school. I mean, sometimes it's not safe to stay after school. They don't have the, you know, they don't have the resource to stay after school. If all you got, if your only ride home is the bus, you're not staying after school for extracurricular activities. So that's a good thing you can do. And then just the systems, I don't want to take a lot of time because we're about to end up, but like everyone said, we all need to work together. If there's 10 different programs in one city doing gang violence or you know, doing the same thing, we all need to be on the same page. We should at least meet monthly, talk about what we're doing, how can we support each other. You know, if our program isn't working great for little Jimmy should probably go over to Candy, because she can probably offer him some, you know, real life love and, you know, some real information that he needs to hear. But we all need to be working together. And that's a big thing with funding, is funders often put us against each other. We have to compete for funding, and we're all friends, we compete, and then people don't want to talk to the people who got the funding because we lost, you know. So we're often put against each other as competitors as well. And unfortunately, when that happens, a lot of times the predominantly white businesses get that funding because the rest of us are put together against each other for that funding.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And I know we have 11 minutes left, so I would love if maybe one or two, because we do have a call to action at the end, if you want to come off mute and ask a question, that would be great.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You can't see me. This is Eartha James. I wanted to ask Mr. Not going to try to say your last name, Vince. I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm in my 50s. I'm sorry. And here I see a lot of Black children who have now, you know, they're disrespectful. And so the thought with people my age, and particularly me, and as they say, I ain't never scared, but to try to approach them in the way you spoke about, if you see someone smoking a cigarette or doing something and you ask them about it, nowadays, at least here, you're subject to get cursed out, or some children go as far as attacking you or whatever. So that doesn't mean that they don't need to be reached, but what would you say is a one thing that can be done to get past that? And, you know, can you do a video or something? Because you could probably teach a lot of people a lot of stuff in reaching those youth. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think, well, first of all, I want to say safety is important first, right? You know, and you know, I'm a pretty big guy, and I don't say that in a way that, right? I'm saying that for me, just the presence alone, because I'm a bigger person, but I also use cautious, and I would say use discernment when you're, you know, making those decisions. That safety is important, and I do that, and there's some risk in that as well. And I'm also putting myself out there, but I'm also trusting in the ability for me as someone who's gone through training to know and understand, like how to look at certain situations and what to do to know and understand when it's safe and when it's unsafe. And then, you know, from just more of a faith lens, you know, for me as someone who's a person of faith, is that I'm always going to trust in that for me, you know, that when I'm putting myself out there, that there's a covering over me. And so one, I would say, to answer your question is if there's a moment that you can seize to speak life or to interrupt whatever is happening, to do so. But I would say use caution And then maybe what it is that you've identified where that place is and who those group of individuals are. And then you go back, or whether you have a team, and then now you're going back to the team, right? Sometimes I'll do that too. As I'm in the community, I see a certain group of young people and I see that they normally hang out in this place. I'll take note of it. And then when the time is appropriate, I'll come back and I know, and then I'll go and, and talk to folks, or just kind of think about what my approach might be. And so if in the moment you feel that it's safe and that you can, use your voice as an opportunity to interrupt those pathways, then do so, but use wisdom and discernment to do so. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
We have time for one more, and then we're going to close us out. Anyone wants to come off mute?
I'd like to ask a question.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Tony Cienfuegos. I'm a mentor with Our Journey, Gang Prevention Empowerment Group, and Intervention. How could we sit down with our school districts to talk about how, like, our students or our youth or students are in a stereotypical classroom, right? Not only are we sitting there not in a relationship with our teacher, but with like being told to learn the same. I know that coming from a migrant working family, and there's seasons when you go to you're working the fields, and then you go to school and you're being you're being taught a curriculum, but you're so tired from work, and you want to learn it, you want to do as best you could, but you got so much shame and brokenness. How can we, I guess what I'm saying is, how can we sit down with our schools, our districts, and our teachers, and to bring that out into light? So it's, so if there is maybe kids that are at risk or are needing reentry into self or into something else, maybe a trade, or, I don't know. There's so much that I want to talk about or ask, but just, I guess that specifically, how can we do that as far as sitting down with our schools and our communities or our schools basically so our youth are able to learn, right, properly or fairly.
I do a lot of work with, thank you, Tony. And thank you guys for being at our youth conference. We do a lot of work with where we have 49 schools we serve in Pierce County, my agency, and we do a lot of work with King County, and we are in Mount Vernon area as well. So what we do is come up, a big thing we do is actually service immigrant and migrant communities. That is why my agency was created, to serve that population. And what we do is come up with a proposal of just basically, what it is that we want to bring to the students, and what is the benefit of us being able to bring that to the students. And we go directly to the district. Once you get your district, it's kind of like creating a memorandum of understanding with the district. Once the district says, yes, you can do this, you can bring this information to our students, and they'll let you know at what levels, then it doesn't matter what the schools think. Then you can go in there and address each school that needs that service, because principals, when you address schools by themselves, certain administrative people don't, especially those who are white, they don't acknowledge that what you're bringing is going to be beneficial for the students. So, go directly to your district. If you need support, contact us here at Consejo, because that is what we do. We work directly with districts to bring this information to the kids in need.
Gracias.
Thank you all. We could give a virtual round of applause. Thank you so much for sharing your living experience, because we know this is hard, and we want to end with a call to action. If we could put that slide up real quick, and have each of you share in the chat what your call to action is going to be. And please join us on Thursday, same time, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Pacific time. We're going to have a similar conversation with different community leaders. We will have a pastor, to those who work in diversion, to a young person who is personally involved in gangs who is now working as in violence prevention. And so please join us. The recording will be sent out, and go to the next one. We'll end on this quote from Brian Stevenson, as we are all in this work together. Thank you all.
Thanks, Ev.